You will be shocked at just how much politicking, conniving, manipulation, and jockeying exists in the Christian music industry. And this is just one of the many reasons I ended up leaving the industry. Let's talk about it.
Someone I know got me on the next thing.
But first, if you don't know who I am, my name is Chope, an Afrofusion recording artist and founder of clothing brand Culture Rich World. With this channel, my mission is to give you good vibes with the music and great insight as I share the many lessons I'm learning on my journey, both personally and professionally. At any point in time during this, if you get value, then please smash that like button, caress that subscribe button, and make sweet love to that bell notification. Let's get it. So I started making music when I was 14. This was shortly after having a deeply religious experience, what Christians would call a conversion moment. So it was at this time that the Christian teachings I had grown up hearing and learning about went from something that was out there to something that was in here. I believed it for myself. It was now my faith. Soon afterwards, I discovered a genre of music called Christian hip hop, and I was blown away by these MCs at their skill and just how they were able to share their faith in the music. Now, particularly during the early years of my Christian journey, this music was really crucial to my growth. I listened to so much of it to the point where I felt as though they weren't making it as quickly as I was consuming it. And so at the time, I had what I thought was a random thought, like, can I create this thing I love listening to so much? And so I started scribbling little raps and poems. And lo and behold, I had this gift that I didn't know I had up until that point. And that set me off on a journey. That opened up Pandora's box for me. It was at that point that my love for music began, and it just sort of kept growing ever since until I went to the point of wanting to make it a career. So naturally, when I made that decision of taking it from hobby to professional aspiration, I wanted to break into not just the music industry, but the Christian music industry. In fact, I had a very judgmental attitude towards non-Christian music, what Christians call the secular industry. Now I just call it the mainstream. But yeah, I really looked down on those not making Christian music, those not listening to Christian music, and even worse, like Christian artists who were not making Christian music. No. To me, these were the absolute worst. And unfortunately, while I do take responsibility for my own judgmental attitude and self-righteous attitude, a lot of it was due in part to the music I was listening to at the time. Not all of it, but a fair amount of it, right? It was very much talking at you. It wasn't communicating with you. It wasn't connecting with you. It wasn't sharing our own vulnerabilities in a way that didn't still somehow give us the moral high ground. All that to say is a lot of the music I was listening to at that point was arrogant, and so was I. But anyways, I knew I wanted to make music, and I knew I wanted to make specifically Christian music and succeed in the Christian music industry. But if you've heard a lot of my recent songs, you can tell there's kind of a difference. So what happened? As I began to make somewhat of a name for myself and began to do the conference and the festival circuit and began to tour, I began to see how the sausage is made. I started to get into some of these rooms, making some high-profile friends and seeing different types of contracts and just kind of like getting a peek behind the curtain. I experienced and heard from some pretty credible friends that showed me just how much hypocrisy there was in the industry. You see, I went into the industry thinking, hey, we're all Christians, right? We all operate by a higher standard. Like, yes, we have business interests, but over and above that, we hold these deeply Christian values that should govern how we do our business. And the deeper I got into the industry, the more I realized that that was just not always the case. As they say, business is business, don't take it personal, right? So I found a lot of the same kind of griminess in the contracts and the behavior that you hear about on the secular side carried through right to the Christian side. So you know those kind of contracts that hold like crazy amount of control over people, their name, their brand, their identity? Yes, that we've all heard about in the secular or mainstream industry. Similar things exist on the Christian side. So I can't tell you how many stories I heard of people who were taken advantage of, treated very unfairly, and then very quickly cut off and discarded. I remember this one guy, he was a road manager for a major Christian artist. He and his wife literally just had a miscarriage, okay? Like, they lost the baby. Very sad story. And because of the stress of that situation, understandably, he wasn't necessarily at his peak performance, right? His work suffered. He was a road manager at the time, but his mind and his heart wasn't there because he and his wife literally just lost the baby. You know what they did to this guy? They fired him. No leave of absence, no break, no like, hey, we understand what's going on. They fired the guy. And so he goes to them and he's like, yo, guys, you understand, like, I literally just had a miscarriage, right? And they're like, yeah, well, sorry, unfortunately, the job is the job. And homeboy got fired. And that's just one of many similar stories where individuals were just not treated in the spirit of and in keeping with the faith that we all claim to profess. And some of this was very jarring to me as I began to look at some of these contracts that I was being presented for other contracts of other artists. And I was blown away by this stuff. As I started to get behind the scenes into some of these rooms, as I began to have some of these conversations, and so I began to realize that for a lot of individuals, when it came to business, it was difficult to see where the Christian ethic came and where the bottom line, hard dollars, empire building requirements came in, and which of these two priorities won when there was a conflict. And then to hear in the music portrayed in the music an image that creates this impression that the high road is the one that's always taken, the road of Jesus over everything. But was that always the case? And it was shocking to me because I was like, yo, what's going on? Like, listen, this is just like the world. Like, I heard this exists in the secular world, and you told me it was better on this side. I saw nepotism, jockeying, politicking, and not to mention just some straight up non-Christian behavior. Now, remember that at this point, I was a super self-righteous, Christians should only make Christian music type. And so I expected more from the Christians, but unfortunately, that wasn't really what I always saw. So this was one of the things that made me begin to question the gloss, the shimmer, the holier than thou PR campaign generated image that the Christian music industry had so successfully sold to me and millions of others. Now, admittedly, with the benefit of hindsight, I don't know why I was surprised. Like, I mean, what did I expect? As a Christian, I believe sin is prevalent in the world. I mean, that's what the Bible teaches. Sin in human hearts, Christian and non-Christian, is the root of all our issues. So with the benefit of years of maturing in my faith, it is no longer surprising to me that there's hypocrisy and all of the other things that I mentioned in the Christian music industry. It's sad, but not surprising. Why? Because at the end of the day, you're still working with human beings. And according to true biblical teachings, the main difference between a Christian and non-Christians is that Christians recognize their sin, they recognize their inability to fix themselves and that broken relationship with their creator, and have turned to a savior to remedy this. As Lecrae once said, I'm not a Christian because I think I'm strong. I'm a Christian because I'm weak and I know I need a savior. So in as much as I was disappointed by what I saw in the Christian industry, and it was one of those things that ultimately caused me to expand beyond this, I say all that not to denigrate or discredit the entire industry as a whole. Unfortunately, where humans are, you're going to have manipulation, you're going to have people being taken advantage of, ultimately you're going to have sin. And so the mainstream industry is no safe haven. I'm not fooled, not at all. Christian and secular industries are more similar than you might think. And discovering this did two things for me. It simultaneously increased my belief and my dependence on the Christian message, and at the same time caused me to kind of question and pull away from the formalized Christian music industry. It's crazy, huh? Second reason for leaving was this. I found in the official Christian music industry, you are very limited with regards to what you can talk about and how you can talk about them. And I say official because in recent years, it's sort of like a subculture growing that's kind of removed from the formalized institution, but I'll talk more about that later. But at the time when I was trying to make Christian music, this subculture did not exist, right? There wasn't really anything like that. And so in the official industry, it was very difficult to talk about a breadth of subjects. You always had to be preaching, like the style may change, whether it's Christian contemporary or black gospel or Christian hip hop. But for a time, the content was quite limited. And if you crossed that boundary, you would face major backlash or at least some major resistance. I mean, ask Lecrae what happened when he started talking about social issues. That nigga got dragged by the church. So you are very limited in the official industry. And that's because in the Christian music industry, there's the prototypical archetype of the main consumer, the soccer mom. And if you think this is a trope, if you think I'm saying this as a pejorative, I am not. I promise you. In the marketing departments of the Christian record labels and companies, there are literal consumer profiles that are developed where there are literal archetypes stereotypes of the different types of consumers. And for popular Christian music, the main consumer is the soccer mom who has the minivan, is packing their kids in it, is taking them to practice or youth group, and doesn't want to have to think about what's playing on the radio. So I get it. And so a part of me empathizes with this, and another part of me just kind of think it sucks, to be honest. And so because of this, those operating in the official Christian music industry are very limited with regard to what they can sing or rap about. So much so that I would go so far as to say that the Christian industry tends to put more restrictions on Christian artists than even the Bible puts on Christian artists. Let me explain. For Christian artists in the Christian industry, there seems to be this expectation that every song is supposed to be vertical, meaning that like you're supposed to always be talking about God or talking to God or evangelizing about God or talking explicitly about the gospel, when in reality, that is just not how we go about our lives. Like, we are not always all the time only ever preaching the gospel. Like, we go through everyday life. Like, yes, that's the heart of what we believe, but we go through everyday life. We go through everyday situations. We all like music that speaks to that. Christians like music that speaks to their experiences. And yet I find it very puzzling that it seems like for the average Christian music listener who puts these high standards on Christian artists, when they want worship music, they'll go to the Christian artist. But when they want music that chronicles the rest of their life experiences, many would rather go to a mainstream artist who is not a Christian than have a Christian artist speak about these experiences through a biblical worldview. Like, it's the strangest thing to me. It's like they're saying, I'm a Christian and I want music that speaks to my everyday experiences.
But hey, Christian artists, you are not allowed to make music about that. I want to hear about my life from other musicians who don't necessarily share my worldview.
You see how backwards that is? And I'm not making this up, I promise. Many Christian artists have faced major backlash from within the Christian community because they steered away from the required JPM counts in their songs, the Jesus per minute counts. It's kind of like an inside joke in the Christian community. And what makes this restrictiveness even weirder is the fact that the Bible itself does not put as many restrictions on the Christian artists. This is what I mean. If you look at all of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, from front to back, it is very clear that the overall theme of the Bible is about Jesus. It's about God sending Jesus into the world to rescue us from our sins. This is the overarching narrative of the Bible. It's pretty clear. But when you zoom in and you go verse by verse, chapter by chapter, or even book by book, not every single page is only ever preaching this message. Some parts of the Bible are pure history. Like, this one grew up here and married this one. This king went to war with this other one. This person killed this other person. And this one ruled this area for this period of time and then was succeeded by this other person. And then this one betrayed this other person, and so on and so forth. Like, it's literally telling you history. And then there are other parts of the Bible that are poetry, beautiful poetry, sometimes pretty graphic poetry. And it's expounding on love and sex and desire and things like that. And then there are other parts of the Bible like the Psalms, and it's King David laying out his heart and his pain and his struggle and his hope. And yes, some parts of the Bible are theology, like the letters of Paul, for example, where he's just unpacking the Christian idea. Like, this is the Christian message, these are the tenets, these are the principles of the Christian faith, aka what Christians call the explicit gospel. Like, the Bible covers it all, the message and the messiness of life in light of the message. But in all of the different passages, there are different genres. So when you go in detail, each and every single chapter doesn't only ever talk about the gospel message, but holistically, the message is about Jesus. So when I think about this, I ask myself, if God himself in his scriptures allows for a multiplicity of narratives, all informed through his lens, if he allows for that to happen, then why do we put such a heavy and unnecessary restriction on Christian artists? Restrictions that say you cannot talk about all of the affairs of life unless you are explicitly in every single song preaching the gospel message at the end of it. That, my friend, is just not life. That is not even how the scriptures bear out. So the way I like to think of the Christian artist's life is this. this. Like the Bible, overwhelmingly, when we look at the full scope of your life, from your songs to your albums to your tweets to your posts to your interviews, we should get a sense that you are a Christian over a period of time at least. If you're a Christian and nobody can ever tell after years of listening to you and watching you and following you, there's probably something else going on there. That said, even though the holistic message should be one of an individual who has faith, that does not mean that every single song, album, tweet, post, interview has to be explicitly Christian. It just doesn't. And so I found that I was very limited in the Christian industry with regard to what I could talk about. Otherwise, my audience would begin to give me a side eye, or all of a sudden the churches that I used to perform at would no longer invite me. Why? Because they were looking for Jesus is great. And Jesus is great, right? And that music is okay. It has its place. But something begins to happen, especially as you grow and mature. As I began to have more life experiences, I found that the things I wanted to talk about when I got married, when I had kids, or when I started building a business began to change. It broadened. I was no longer the 20-year-old guy who was fresh to the faith and was just all about preaching the gospel and evangelizing my university campus. I began to experience new things. I had long-term friendships that came to an end. I had a close friend of mine die. She was like a sister to me. My parents got divorced. My wife had a miscarriage. I had financial difficulties. I had financial successes. I have goals. I have ambitions. All of these experiences were new to me, and I wanted to talk about them as honestly and as transparently as I possibly could. I mean, music is therapy, and I wanted to talk about my life plainly, but of course still informed by my Christian worldview. But it doesn't mean that every single song was going to have a neat little gospel message at the end of it. And I just found that this was very difficult to do in the Christian industry. And so I had to expand out of it. And that brings me to reason number 3. The third reason I ended up leaving or expanding was because personally for me, and I have to say this is a personal conviction, okay? I could not reconcile my desire for financial gain from my music with using the gospel message as a means of achieving it. I'm not saying this is inherently wrong. There are artists and labels out there who have a heart for preaching the gospel and also for building really solid businesses out of that preaching. KB and Native Supply immediately come to mind, and there's no judgment there. Kevin is an honest, godly brother. It's just that for me, I could not make sense of it in my head and in my heart. Like, I distinctly remember on many occasions backstage at a festival or concert right before going on stage to perform, and it's me and a bunch of some of the other Christian artists. We're talking and we're hanging out. And we're talking about any number of things, but sometimes we'd be talking about, I remember instances we'd be talking about numbers like, hey man, last month I sold these many CDs, or I got these many downloads, or I sold this much merch, or booked these many shows, and for this show right here, I'm trying to sell this, that, and the third. Like, we're literally talking stats and numbers, talking about our goals. And then the runner comes up and says, hey buddy, you're up. And within a blink of an eye, the artist goes from talking about these goals and objectives to going on stage and saying, anybody in here who loves Jesus, put your hands up in the air. And of course the people react to that. Of course the people respond to that. And that just kind of started to rub me the wrong way. I found it very difficult to have KPIs, key performance indices, to have specific financial aims and objectives with my business and know that the means by which I was going to achieve them was by using the gospel message to tug on people's heartstrings. Like, I know if I say things like, anybody here who loves Jesus and is not ashamed of the gospel and just wants to follow Jesus, put your hands up in the air. I know that if I say that, the people will respond and will very likely end up at my merch table when I'm done performing. And that is exactly what I want to happen. So I'm going to say the right words. And this just became very, very, very difficult for me to reconcile and make sense of in my head. Now, I'm not saying preaching the message and building a business out of that is inherently wrong. At the end of the day, nothing is free. The shows ain't free. The tour buses ain't free. The sound tech ain't free. The venue ain't free. Road manager ain't free. I get it. Everybody got bills to pay. And there are Christian artists and Christian business owners who have found a way to preach the message with a purity of heart and still build successful businesses. I just knew that for me, in my conscience, I could not stomach having these financial aims and objectives and knowing that my medium for getting there was going to be by using the gospel message. For me, it made much more sense, and it was much easier for my conscience to build successful businesses selling something that was not immoral, but not explicitly religious. And again, I have to stress, this is just a personal conviction of mine. Like, if I'm selling you good, scratch good. If I'm selling you great music, because my music is fire, you should go stream that, right? That it's not necessarily preaching the gospel message per se, but it's coming from a Christian worldview, then in my head, it makes sense for me to charge you for that. It makes sense for me to go meet with my team and be like, hey guys, okay, these are our sales targets, right? These are our ticket goals, our streaming goals, our revenue goals, our margin goals, etc. Because I know that the path I'm using to reach these very set financial objectives is not through the direct use or leveraging of the gospel message. You see what I'm saying? Or of any of the other businesses that I've been involved in, I can say this month, this is how many new clients I want to close, right? Or this is how much revenue I want to generate through this, or this is how many properties I would like to acquire to generate me X amount of dollars. Like, my conscience is perfectly fine with that, right? It just makes much more sense for me and is much easier to stomach. My conscience is at peace working on building businesses, very financially successful businesses, Lord willing, when the thing I am selling is not the Christian message. And that was the third reason I ended up having to expand beyond the Christian music industry. And finally, the fourth reason was this: it simply was no longer necessary. With the number of tools we now have to build and nurture an audience, it is no longer necessary to try to get into a particular industry. Whether it's Christian or secular mainstream, for better or worse, the algorithm on all of these platforms have gotten so smart and are getting smarter that they can easily put your stuff in front of the people who are most likely to respond to it. So now the name of the game is not trying to break into an industry. The name of the game is building and cultivating your specific audience. And if you do this well enough, the industry, whatever that industry is, will come knocking on your door. And we've seen this happen multiple times. So the blueprint now is to be you, to let your personality shine, to offer to the world the things that make you uniquely you. And it's no secret, that is exactly what I am doing with this channel and all of the content I am now creating. Listen, personally, for a long time, I have been hesitant to show this analytical, rational, educational side of me because I feared that it would take away from my artist image. You know the artist image, right? Cool, removed, I should have my shades at this point. Distant, always well put together, and particularly in urban music that I'm in, kind of uneducated, not as articulate, not as available, at least not for the artists who want to be seen as A-listers. The artist image is not one of the individuals who will sit down and give a lecture or speech or teach repeatedly, which is one of the things I am doing with this channel. No, that's a speaker. That's a thinker. That's not an Afrofusion artist. But says who? Says who? Thankfully, we now have many more tools that make it possible for each and every single one of us to find our tribe. So now I no longer have to try to be a Christian artist any more than I have to try to be a mainstream artist. I am free to be whatever kind of artist I want to be. I am free to be Chopay. And you're free to be you. I hope you found value in this. If you did, like, comment, share with a friend. If you want to keep seeing more great content from this channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification. And if you want to support this channel and what my team and I are doing, please go join the Culture Rich World mailing list for special discounts and perks on some of the amazing pieces we've got. Links in the description. Check out these music videos for some good vibes and this playlist for more great insights. I'll see you next time. Peace.
I'll admit it. Yeah, I get it. You been holding me down for a minute. I've been taking too long, I'll admit it. Yeah, I'll admit it.